Good morning, boys and girls. This is our language arts e-learning lesson for Monday, April 6th. This lesson is called, with our grammar, it's called Writing with Nouns. And actually what we're really doing is taking a look at sentences that we are able to combine the subjects and create compound sentences. Now, just quick review. Remember that nouns are people, places, and things. And when we're talking about the subjects of sentences, we're talking about who or what the sentence is about. Let's just take a look at the top of the page here, and this is page 23 in your English workbook. Writing with nouns. Your two sentences. Children enjoy watching television. Adults enjoy watching television. And that combined sentence would be children and adults enjoy watching television. In those two separate sentences, you first need to identify your subjects, children and adults. And if you notice the remainder of the sentence, the predicate of those sentences are the same. Both say enjoy watching television. And because both of the predicates are the same, remember the predicate begins with the action or with a verb. Because the predicates are the same, you're able to combine the subjects using that conjunction and. So now we have children and adults enjoy watching television. I have a couple other sentences here that I'd like us to take a look at together. So very simply, my friend took a walk. Matt took a walk. So what you need to notice first of all is that the predicates are the same. Took a walk. Okay, so the actions in both of those sentences are the same, and because the predicates are the same, then we are able to combine our subjects, my friend and Matt. And so now we can combine it into one compound sentence, my friend and Matt took a walk. The ideas in both of those sentences have not changed, but because the predicates are the same in both, we are able to combine those subjects and create this compound subject, my friend and Matt. And then we have the same predicate, which is took a walk. The next example I have is the salesman spoke to the manager, a customer spoke to the manager. Again, first thing you need to notice is that the predicates are the same. Spoke to the manager, spoke to the manager. And because those predicates are the same, then we are able to take our subjects, the salesman and a customer, and now we're able to combine them and create a compound sentence. The salesman and a customer spoke to the manager. Now, sometimes the sentences might have a little bit more in there. For example, if we added in some adjectives, words that describe the nouns, we would still do the same thing. So let's just say, instead of just saying the salesman spoke to the manager, we could say the quiet salesman spoke to the manager. And maybe there was an angry customer that needed to speak to the manager. So now we can say an angry customer spoke to the manager. Same thing, the subjects are still, in this case, the quiet salesman and an angry customer, but the predicates are still exactly the same, spoke to the manager. And because the predicates are the same, we can create that compound sentence. So now our sentence would just say the quiet salesman and an angry customer spoke to the manager. So again, it doesn't just have to be a one-word subject that you're combining. There can be more to it. There can be descriptives. There can be these adjectives. There can be other things in the subject. So I don't want you to just think that, a subject can only just be one word that we're able to combine. No, you know that a subject can have more than one word, and therefore when we combine them and create that compound sentence, you're still going to have all of that information there. Okay, let's take a look now at the workbook, page 23. And we take a look here. Again, it says to rewrite these sentences from an entertainment magazine. Combine 4 pairs of sentences by making compound subjects. Okay, so we take a look. Television talk shows are very popular. Radio talk shows are very popular. So right there, you can already hear that you're repeating the same predicate. Okay, you have are very popular, radio talk shows are very popular. So that predicate are very popular is repeated. Because it's repeated, you're then able to combine the subjects. So here we have television talk shows and radio talk shows. Now, in this case, when we go to combine them, we don't need to say television talk shows and radio talk shows, because again, we don't need to repeat something twice. So what we can do then simply is say television and radio talk shows. Again, in writing, to make your writing more interesting, okay, and to have it to flow a little bit better, you don't need to repeat. So we don't want to say television talk shows and radio talk shows are very popular. We can just simply say television and radio talk shows are very popular. Then we have talk show hosts ask the guests interesting questions. The audience asks questions too. Again, since we have the idea that they are both asking questions, okay, we have the talk show hosts ask questions and the audience asks questions. So we can see that the predicate is the same in both of those sentences. One, they're described as interesting questions, and the other just simply says questions. But because the predicates are the same, we can then combine the subjects in those sentences. So here we're going to say we have talk show hosts is the subject of one sentence. The audience is the subject of another sentence. So now we can say talk show hosts and the audience ask questions. Now, sometimes like that, you need to make slight changes. Okay, slight changes in the verb. Remember that you always have to have that subject-verb agreement. So because we have talk show hosts, and that's plural, we would simply add, our verb would just simply be ask. And so then also audience by itself, we would say audience asks. But because now we're saying talk show hosts and the audience ask questions, because now we have a compound subject. When we have that compound subject, so our verb is just going to be ask. So sometimes you do have to make those slight adjustments with your verb. So be careful with that. The next part says, the studio audience feels as though it is part of the show. The viewing or listening audience feels the same way. So part of the show, the audience feels as though it's part of the show, and the listening audience feels the same way. Well, what's the same way? The same way as the studio audience, which means that feeling as though they are part of the show. So again, even though they're written slightly differently, we know that it's the same because it says feels the same way. So now our subjects are the studio audience and the viewing or listening audience. So we actually have three parts to that subject, because we have a studio audience, we have a viewing, and a listening audience. So now when we go to write it, we start out with the studio audience and the viewing or listening audience feels the same way. Okay, because we want to say that they're both feeling the same way. They both feel as though they are part of the show. Okay, the other thing that you could do here, okay, I used the same way. In other words, I'm saying that, these audiences, whether it's the studio audience or it's the viewing or the listening audience, they all feel the same way. Or you could have worded it to say the studio audience and the viewing or listening audience feel as though they are part of the show. So in this case, you actually have two choices of how you could write those sentences as a compound sentence. And then the last two, you have the talk show hosts get to know the real people behind the headlines. The audience gets to know them too. Okay, so in that last sentence, the audience gets to know them too, meaning the people behind the headlines. So here we have get to know the people behind the headlines, and here gets to know them too, meaning gets to know those people behind the headlines. Our subjects, we have talk show hosts and have the audience. So when we combine those, talk show hosts and the audience get to know the quote unquote real people behind the headlines. Okay. All right, so again, looking at sentences where you have repeated predicates or very similar predicates, or in this case where it says, the audience gets to know them too, which is the same as saying the audience gets to know the people behind the headlines. So you need to read these sentences carefully, okay, and then looking to see if you have that repeated predicate, then you're going to be able to join the subjects and make it a compound sentence. Okay, if you turn the page, take a look at page 24 in your workbook. And again, similar, it's the same thing, but now at the top of the page, the similar setup showing you the two sentences and then the combined sentence. Henry Ford was an automotive pioneer. He was one of the first to build a self-propelled vehicle. Now, here we don't have identical predicates. Here we're just simply looking at two sentences that can then be combined into one. And it says, Henry Ford, one of the first to build a self-propelled vehicle, was an automotive pioneer. Again, what they're trying to show you is you have two sentences that have the same subject. We're talking about Henry Ford in both of those sentences. And in the first one, it simply says that he was an automotive pioneer. And then in the second, it says he was one of the first to build a self-propelled vehicle. Okay, those go together. Okay, those two sentences go together, so you are able to combine them. And so here they said, Henry Ford, one of the first to build a self-propelled vehicle, was an automotive pioneer. You might also say Henry Ford was an automotive pioneer and one of the first to build a self-propelled vehicle. That's acceptable as well. Again, it's just the idea that we don't want, short sentences, short choppy sentences. We also need to be looking to see ways that we can combine sentences that really do go together. Okay, so again, there are two different ways that you could combine the sentences here. So now the directions here are said to revise these paragraphs from a book about Henry Ford and combine each pair of underlined sentences. Okay. Now this is a little bit different than the page that we did together. The page that we did together was strictly looking at predicates that were exactly the same and combining the subjects. Well, here they're taking a little bit further where they just simply want you to look at sentences that can be combined. Okay, now when you rewrite these sentences, it's not necessary for you to rewrite these paragraphs because you really do have two paragraphs here. You don't need to rewrite the two paragraphs, but you do need to rewrite these groups of sentences. So here you have one group here where you have two sentences that you need to combine. So then you can just write how you combine those two sentences. Then you have another two sentences that you need to combine, and you can write those down here. And then you have another group and then one more group. So you have 4 pairs of sentences. You only need to rewrite those 4 pairs of sentences. Okay, but please make sure that you do skip a space in between each so it's clear where the two sentences that belong together are written and then where the next two are. remember more than one way that you can combine those sentences. Okay? All right, so that is your English lesson for today. For spelling today, you are beginning lesson 25, which is space words, all words having to do with space. Remember that you're going to take a practice test on Spelling City, and that's going to act as your pre-test. So no previewing the words, just simply do that first practice test as a pre-test. And then you will need to complete pages 97 and 98 in your spelling book. Okay. Wordly Wise today, you have the closure worksheet for lesson 10. Okay, today is the closure, and then tomorrow will be your Wordly Wise test. Reading today, chapter 9. Be sure that you're answering questions numbers 4 and 5. Now, if you notice in the reading of each chapter, chapters in this book are a little bit longer maybe than in our last book, but your number of questions is usually only about 2 or 3. So please make sure that you are reading, really taking your time reading and understanding the chapter, and then being thorough with those 2 questions. Okay? Again, it's important that you're understanding what you're reading and that you're prepared when we discuss these chapters. So, again, spend the time reading carefully, understanding what you're reading, and then be thorough in your answers, since you do only have 2 or 3 questions to answer today. It's just 2. So please make sure that you're really thorough with those answers, writing in complete sentences, using correct capitalization and end punctuation. Okay, that's all of our language arts for today, and I'll see you later.